let's get to the game I was at, Ohio State and Maryland, and Marvelous Marvin, he was pretty good.
3rd down and 10. McCord sets up over the middle again. This time it'll stand. Marvelous Marvin Harrison. Marvin, 8 catches, 163 yards, and a touchdown.
Yeah, he's pretty good. He's pretty good. Remember that guy, Marvin Harrison Jr., probably best player in college football. By the way, side note, just really quickly, is anybody better than Gus? Nobody has the timing and control that Gus Johnson has in those big moments. Nobody. I listen and watch to a lot of football. I watch a lot of football. Gus Johnson is second to none. His ability to control the biggest moment and himself at a 10. He goes to 10 and yet has control through that moment. Marvelous. Marvin. I mean, it's like, geez, that's why he's so good. That's why I'm such a lucky guy getting to work with him. Now let's talk about the game really quick, because Ohio State, you could look at this 2 different ways. And I think a lot of Ohio State fans that I see on social media have looked at this game 2 different ways. It's a glass half full, glass half empty mentality. If you're a glass half full mentality, you say to yourself, hey, we just beat, as Joel put it, the 4th best Big Ten team by 20. Hey, glass half full. If you're a glass half empty guy, you say, man, that score was not anywhere close to indicative of the game that I watched. So which camp do I fall into? I'm part of the second camp. I normally try to be optimistic, but what I saw in a 37-17 win was not indicative of a 37-17 win. What I saw was not a 20-point win. It got to 20. It was not, hey, it's 37-10 and we give up, a late touchdown and it makes it a 20-point game. That would have felt a lot different. Probably would have been controlled a lot different. But when you look at that game, when you watch that game, it was not a 20-point blowout. It just wasn't. Ohio State has, I think, some real flaws that they need to fix really quickly. The offensive line for Ohio State has to play better. They played their worst game of the season. Full stop. The offensive line was sleepwalking early, as was a big portion of that team. Off of the off week and the emotional win over Notre Dame, they did not play well early. They were not ready to play, period. And I think even Ryan Day would admit that. Their offensive line allowed 3 sacks, couldn't get anything going in the run game. They averaged under 2 yards per carry, 62 yards total, their fewest in a win in 20 years. Travion Henderson was not in the game, but it wasn't a Travion issue. If they had blocked it up and the running backs just weren't finding the right holes, if there were things there to hit home runs and then they weren't and they would trip up, that would be a different story. And I would say, hey, listen, I'm not worried because Travion comes back and those are going to be all of a sudden big gains. Now, maybe he can make up for some of these mistakes, but what I saw was just egregious mistakes by the offensive line. Maybe not egregious. That might be too big of a word, but really bad offensive line play for the majority of the game in the run game. The defense, they only have 7 sacks in 5 games this season, but it's not about that because the defense actually has gotten into a point where their philosophical change, I think, is really benefiting this team, and in particular with a team that's trying to find their footing on the offensive side. Last thing on the offensive line, I pointed it out several times. Their inability to get the linebackers blocked and get up to the second level is really hurting them right now. They have got to find a way to make that happen. They struggled with it against Indiana. They really struggled with it against Maryland. This has got to change. They're double teams. If you're going to zone block, and they like to be a zone blocking team, they like to do a little bit of everything. So they'll gap, they'll man, they'll use power. but they like to run zone, okay? And they sequence off of zone. They build off of zone. Off of zone is where they get a lot of their big play action passes, okay? So that needs to be effective in order for their offense to be effective. And they do not combo block to the linebackers very good at all. So that has to change. Like they have to get better at that. When you combo block, right? And whichever direction you're going, let's say it's just going to be like the guard and tackle, and they've got to combo block the down lineman, and they've got to get that lineman blocked up to the linebacker. Okay, well that means that this player who's in between the guard and the tackle, he's the 3 technique. Okay, and if he's the 3 technique, what you're trying to do is block him. And then the tackle is trying to push him enough and get enough movement where the guard can get on his outside shoulder to reach the 3 technique in order to bump the tackle up to the linebacker. And what happens is that they just kind of get washed down the line of scrimmage like this and never get bumped up to the linebacker. All right, so that's all the technicalities to be like, that has to get better, because if they play like that up front against Penn State, it's going to be dicey. It's going to be really dicey. The amount of pressure on Kyle McCord to be the only offense in the pass game is going to be immense. It's going to be immense. Now, he did play really well after that first few series. He did find Marvin Harrison Jr. They were able to get going, and it was much more of Ohio State's offense, in particular throwing the football, in those last 5 or 6 series. And once they got rolling, it was really good. It was really good. So again, that's a little bit glass half full, but they never got the run game going, and that's a problem. It has to get going. Their big plays are generally off of play action, and when they're just trying to drop back, it creates a lot of pressure on the quarterback. Not in the form of a rush, although that can happen, but in the form of just pressure to perform for a young quarterback. Now we get into the defensive side. I'm a big believer actually in this defense. Not that it's been dominant, although their statistics are very good in terms of 3rd-ranked scoring defense in the country, but in the fact that their philosophical change, which I talked about on Saturday, has really paid dividends for them. So they changed a little bit from a philosophy standpoint to be a little less aggressive, blitz a little bit less, play a little bit softer coverage. Again, not a huge change, but just a little bit of a change. And what that's led to is limiting the explosive plays. They gave up 18 plays last season of 40 or more yards. 8 of them, almost half of them came in their 2 losses against Michigan and Georgia. So they've got a concerted effort to get better in that area. They have not given up a 40-yard play all season long. So kudos to that defense, because they have achieved what they emphasized. That mentality and philosophy, I believe, has allowed them to bring along the offense, a young quarterback and an offensive line that clearly is still trying to find their footing. If they would have been giving up quick, easy, long touchdowns to Maryland, Maryland could have raced out to a really big lead. And then at that point, who knows what happens in a game like that? So a big reason why they were able to overcome the offensive line's problems and the slow start offensively is because the defense has this bit of a change in philosophy. That has allowed them to sustain some poor series on the offensive side. There's not quite let's just face it, there's not the quick points that were available, in particular in those 2 losses to Georgia and Michigan at the end of the year. Now, a couple of things that this change in philosophy does, if you're just wondering, like, well, what are the unintended consequences of playing this philosophy of defense? Number 1 is it's going to limit your offensive possessions, because you will extend through softer coverage the opponent's possession. So now their possession might, instead of running a minute and a half or 2 minutes, run 4 minutes. You still don't give up any points because it's a bit bend don't break, but there's 4 minutes off the clock and not 2 minutes off the clock. Conversely, you're also not going to get the sack numbers that you generally did before, because there are quicker and easier throws available to the opponent quarterback. They can get the ball out of their hand quicker, and you see this at times. Taulia Tagovailoa was able to get the ball out of his hands, and so the rush doesn't quite get home because you're not playing tight coverage at the line of scrimmage. Part of the reason Chase Young had such a dominant year in 2019 is that they also had dominant corners. Okudah, Arnett, Wade, they all were on the field, and they took away easy throws. Well, when easy throws are gone, guess what you can do? Get the quarterback to pump, pat the ball, and sit in the pocket. When he does that, you can get to the quarterback. Now that's a little different for Ohio State. They are allowing some of those easier throws, but they're limiting explosive plays. Give and take, but that's what's going on with Ohio State. After the game, Ryan didn't think that the Ibuka injury was anything major. Let's hope it wasn't. He got nicked up during that game. So we'll hope that he's better and back for not only Purdue, but then in a couple of weeks, Penn State, and that they would be full strength. So that's Ohio State. Again, got to get better up front.